The new tank in World of Tanks on World War II mode is here as part of the Season Pass, and it is a Tier 10 T-58 heavy tank, and it is an American heavy tank, and that's what's going to be showcased in today's video, because I'm sure some of you are interested in finding out whether this tank is worth picking up and whether the Ultimate Season Pass, which gives you this for basically on top of all of the other rewards of a Season Pass, for 6,000 gold, so you're essentially paying 4,000 gold for 25 level skips, this tank and a commander as well as part of the Season Pass. So it's pretty cheap for a tier 10 premium tank, and you'll probably never see this thing on sale for anywhere near the price at which we're able to pick it up as part of the Ultimate Season Pass. But of course, don't feel pressured into buying this tank, and that's what this video is all about, whether it's going to actually suit your playstyle, the strengths, the weaknesses, and what this tank is about, so you can take it out. So first things first, let's have a look at the stats, and then we'll get into two good gameplays which showcase a little bit about this tank. They're not as insanely stellar gameplays, but they will showcase the kind of general nature of the T-58 heavy, and of course currently in the matchmaker being pretty awful with like 6 T-58 heavies on each team. So yeah, it's not very fun to play right now. But what this tank offers is, of course, a autoloader that we haven't really seen in World of Tanks, and that is because it has a 750 damage autoloader that has 3 shells, so you have a capability of doing 2,250 damage in one clip. Now that might seem pretty OP, but the difference with this tank over something like, say, a Waffle 100, which has 750 alpha but 3 shells as well, but it doesn't get the intraclip reload, and it of course doesn't get the armor that this tank has. So that's kind of the trade-off that you get between this and something like a Waffle 100, as well as being slightly more mobile and a bit more flexible than the Waffle. But key things about this tank is the 7.5 second intraclip reload. So after you fully reload, takes about 20 something seconds. It's 26 seconds base. Obviously, if you're using food, you can get that down to 24 seconds roughly, slightly less. I think it's like 23.4 seconds, something like that. And that's allowing you to essentially reload all 3 of those shells, and then you take a further 15 seconds to fully fully clip whatever you're firing at if you want to be able to deal all of that damage in one go. So it takes a long time to get out that damage, and usually you're not actually able to do that because 7.5 seconds is long enough for the opponent to pull back around a corner having taken 1 shell. And of course, if you don't manage to double track someone, or someone else helps to retrack an opponent, it's very difficult to get off all of your shells of damage in one go. So you have to play it like a brawler, but you have to be very switched on with this tank to make it work 100% if you want to maximize how good it is. Now, other than the fact that this gets such high alpha with regards to its main gun, 750, it also gets fantastic penetration, and it is usually comparable to that of tank destroyers. The standard penetration value on its AP rounds is 276, which is fantastic. Genuinely very, very good. That's better than most tier 10 medium tanks, and of course this is a heavy tank, and probably in heavy tank in like name only. I mean, it kind of is, but it's kind of not. It's more like a tank destroyer hybrid of a heavy. Yeah, it's a weird little kind of nuanced vehicle. But the thing is that not only do you get a good standard pen with this vehicle, but you get heat rounds that have 370 pen, which means that you can basically blitz through the majority of tanks if you hit them. And with the accuracy of this tank being, as you can see on screen, with all of the bonuses etc that I've got on this tank with the commander, 0.28 accuracy, which is really, really good. Quite a long aim time, 2.62 seconds. The dispersion values of this tank, although not actually stated in this, are actually pretty bad. So it feels a lot less accurate than what it actually states, and that's because when you move, it blooms out that reticle a lot more, and because you can't actually use everything that you might want to with regards to, you know, dealing all of that damage in a short period of time, you're often on the move to be able to get to a different position to fire after that intraclip reload. So it does affect your accuracy, and it isn't necessarily always amazing. But you can see some examples in the gameplay that we'll be showcasing in a little bit. But more on the stats though, is that it also gets a pretty decent amount of hit points, maybe not for a heavy, 2,250. So it's not the most amount, but it kind of keeps it somewhat balanced. You got a top forward speed of 35 kilometers an hour, so it's actually pretty decent. Traverse speed of this tank, so how quickly it can turn, not particularly amazing. You've got 30 degrees a second on the hull and 33 degrees a second on the turret, which means, yeah, you are kind of able to maintain a decent speed, so you're not going to get kind of overturned by a lot of those light tanks, but it's still not amazing, and it will take you 6 seconds to fully go 360 degrees. So in the initial encounter with a light tank, you can probably keep up with them, but as the time goes on, you're going to find yourself trailing behind them as they kind of circle around you, so not particularly too fun. So you have to outplay them by moving into a corner or something like that to kind of come away with the win in that sort of scenario. But the other thing that I wanted to note is the ammo speed, since it is a factor of this vehicle. 870 with the standard, 826 with the premium, and 770 with the HE. And the problem with this that I've found is that with 870 meters a second shell velocity on the standard rounds, it's okay. It's not outrageously terrible, but it is still very noticeable when you're trying to lead your shells. And of course, if you do miss, if you're not leading 100%, and you don't necessarily have that shell velocity speed to help you out, then yeah, you can end up missing quite a few, and it means quite a lot when you do miss with this vehicle, since you are essentially costing yourself not only a 7.5 second reload, but also you're costing yourself that initial reload. So if you combined it all and you basically take into account how long it takes you to reload for each shell, although it's 7.5 seconds to output the damage, it's actually more like 15 seconds for every shell that you fire, essentially. Of course, you can burst it out in that 15 seconds, but you still have to have that long reload at the end of it. So you've got to keep an eye on when you want to fire and making sure that you do prioritize your targets. But other than that, the tank actually has pretty good view range. Now, when you consider that to some of the other vehicles at tier 10, it's fairly consistent. 523 meters is what I've got it as. We are running advanced optics because we can't use a gun rammer in this thing since it's an autoloader. So essentially we use the coated optics to get that view range and hopefully not get outspotted as much by some of the vehicles that we'll come up against. We ran a fair half and half between the AP and the heat ammunition. I didn't take any HE because I always find HE in a autoloader to be a little bit of a waste, and when you don't have an enormous amount of shells, it can be a little bit difficult to reliably kind of finish off those games where if you have that superb game, you're going to run out of rounds. But HE is actually HEP. So this is essentially a high penetration HE round that has 120 pens, so it's very good. It is up there with some of the highest HE pens in the game. So 120 allows you to pen basically all of the mediums that you face. But the problem is once again, is that when you do load that clip, you've got to wait 26 seconds. And so you've got better be sure that when you do fire off those HE rounds, that whatever you're firing against, it's going to be continuously lightly armored vehicles. Maybe taking a HE clip for potentially the late game if you know that there's only a Waffle E100 alive, or if you know there's a Waffle Panzer IV, maybe it's worth it, but for the majority of the time it's probably not worth it, and you're best off just having these standard rounds. But you know, it could be there as a kind of a backup if you do find yourself in those scenarios. So just stay tuned for that. And of course you can decide yourself. I'm not going to tell you exactly what you need to be choosing because it's down to you at the end of the day. I'm just giving you my recommendations. Perks wise, of course, we've gone with the bog standard. This is probably not the best setup that you could use since silent driving doesn't work on a heavy. It's mainly just because this was the only available commander. But key ones you'll want is 6th Sense, Born Leader, steady aim, rapid loading, situational awareness, camo expertise, and then essentially you could go for track mechanic, or you might want run and gun as well to just boost that accuracy, as well as snapshot to get better accuracy as well. And that's just going to benefit you quite a bit, and potentially maybe even taking clutch braking could help out this tank a little bit, but it's not necessarily one of the ones that I would go with 100% of the time. So just keep that in mind, and hopefully that will give you an idea as to how you can play these tanks and make them work entirely. So we've talked a lot about the stats. What about the armor? Now, the armor of the T58 Heavy is actually something very interesting, and this is because I initially thought this tank's armor is going to be terrible. And although it is somewhat bad, it's actually very good in places, and you can bounce quite a few rounds when people go for the turret. Now with the hull armor, different story, you get penned quite easily unless they hit that red bar that you can see on the screen right now. But essentially you have these big cheeks, much like the T57 heavy, that can be penned, but if you don't manage to hit them, and often it's quite difficult to do that, and if you hit them at a weird angle, you can end up bouncing off of them quite easily because it's quite thick. It's not as thin as the 57 heavy, where essentially if you just hit the 57 heavy in the cheeks, it's penning. This tank, not quite so much, and it also has a very bouncy mantlet. Also has these red places, which are basically impossible to pen, to be honest with you. And then, of course, the cupola is quite small as well, so it's difficult to hit that. So there are a few points on this tank that are just a pain to deal with. And when it's using 8 degrees of gun depression, it only gets worse. So, yeah, I mean, it's a fairly solid, weird armoured tank. It's not necessarily heavily armoured, in my opinion, but it is definitely something that will catch you off guard if you aren't aiming for those cheeks and making sure that you do have a steady aim. It's not just a case of aim for the turret and pen like the 57 heavy is. This is something a little bit different and a little bit thicker, so just be aware of that when you're coming up against it. And of course the hull armour being, as you would expect, from one of these American tanks, pretty bad, but let's move into some gameplay. Let's see how it actually plays, and yeah, I can talk you through how you can play it, how you can take it out, etc., and the sort of things to keep an eye out for. Now, the first game that we do have is on Kasserine, and this is the kind of higher damage of the 2 replays that I'm going to showcase today. And this is a map that I kind of enjoy, and is one of the ones that is kind of pretty decent for this tank. And I feel like you can use this tank in a variety of different ways on this map. You can use the hold down meta, where you can try and use that turret armor, as well as being able to pull back behind quite a bit of cover using the ridge lines. It's kind of one of those where if you just maintain a clear mind and you're not just YOLOing in, this tank is not a YOLO wagon. It doesn't have the intricate reload to do that. You can't just go in, deal all your damage and leave again, especially because it's not particularly that fast either. And of course that intricate reload really does suffer with regards to the YOLO meta, which is good, I'm not going to lie. We don't want to be seeing any machines driving around with 750 alpha, but straight away we go into this position. It's a nice little place to understand where the enemy tanks are going to be going at the beginning of the game. We spot both the IS-4 and the machine, the IS-4 being the tank that we actually managed to pen there, and that's because we were using those AP rounds with the high penetration. It would be very difficult to pen it with something like a medium tank reliably, and so these rounds do help you out in that regard. But straight away we bounce a shell of damage, and you'll see this quite often if you're coming up against these things, like we say with that armor a second ago. It's pretty decent, but straight off the bat we're seeing that the AVRE is pushed over this side, which is not a fun tank to play against, as you well know. That was the previous season's mistake, so yeah, glad that we didn't end up with another AVRE, but this is kind of annoying as well. Now we get hit by the machine, who's poking and cresting that side over there, so I'm a little bit wary to get hit by him again. Instead we come over to here. This provides some cover from the people on top of the hill where that AVRE was. You should always come here if you're thinking about trying to avoid those people, but also maintaining enough of a distance so that you can counter them if they try and push that side. Now we try and go for a little pre-aim on the chisel. I was hoping he'd come up further. Obviously we wanted to reload anyway, so it's not a problem that we missed, but it would have been nice if I saved it or did a little bit of damage. But at this point I realised that the enemy team have pretty much steamrolled our other flank, so in true autoloader style you don't want to be on your own, especially with that kind of long reload. So instead we decide to move back and position ourselves in a better position. This is really the play of the game that allowed me to do much better and end up having a decent result in the end. And it's often these small things that allow you to have the really good games, because, you know, if I stay where I am and I get surrounded by 4 tanks, there's only so much you can do, especially when you've only got 2,250 damage that you can maximally do within about 40 seconds. And that is of course a lot of damage, but it's still not enough. So we want to make sure that we aren't doing anything stupid. So instead we come over to this ridge, we provide cover from the right hand side, and we get another shell, kind of luckily, into the AVRE as he was exposing that lower plate. which is the kind of one frontal weak point of that tank, as well as the bit above where it has that plow on the front, because it should have a plow, considering that the FE 4005 doesn't have one. But that's a completely different topic, and instead we try and push towards this IS-4 who's pushing over on the side. Now, we haven't done an inordinate amount of damage considering that we're 4 minutes into the game, but it's still a decent result, and so we're able to pick up a little bit of damage and also a little bit of assistance, as you saw, because we were spotting the people over on the southern side or southeastern side of the map. And so instead I go after this IS-4. Hopefully we can get there and get there before the friendly Jaegeru does, so we can at least get a little bit more damage. I was kind of hesitant to just YOLO in because I'm not entirely sure whether we're going to win this game, but equally I don't want to be left in the dust if we don't manage to win. So I'm pushing my way towards him, and maybe or maybe not the Jaegeru will finish him off. It's not looking good for us to be able to get any more damage on him. Yeah, I mean, definitely not when the T-92 comes in and tries to play tango with him. So straight away, a decent game. I mean, you'd be pretty annoyed if you were going for your third mark and you had a game like this. It just seems like the enemy team weren't there to really reward us for anything. But in true autoloader style, we're going for the highest hit point tank that we can see, and basically the only hit point tank that we can see, and that's the E5. So we make a little bit of a move over here. Hopefully we can get up onto the ridge line and get a shot down onto the E5. And oh look, a lovely amount of hit points has cropped up trying to get behind the tortoise. So yeah, I will quite easily farm up that damage, and since we're fully reloaded, we're going to go for the low health tank. We want to get him out the game, then we can focus on the next vehicle that we need to. And there is still the machine over on the other side, so don't want to get hit by him. But we spot also the T-58 Heavy, who's down on this area over here. Now we noticed that he fired, so it's pretty safe to pull out. We go for the lucky shot there on the 58. Now I wouldn't recommend firing on the move, but he was going behind cover anyway, so might as well go for it. The machine then comes outside on, which is not a good idea, but now you can see the armor actually working on this vehicle, at least. But being able to bounce a few rounds there from the machine. So bounced 1,000 damage, which is quite nice, and you probably would never see this in the 57 Heavy, or at least reliably see bounce damage this high with the 57 Heavy. So that's kind of the advantage that this tank has, is of course having that armor. Now, do you rely on the armor? No, but you can certainly use it and make sure that you kind of put yourself in a good position to use that armor where you do get hold down, and that's going to be the best for you. Now I decided not to shoot there since we want to save those rounds for the machine at a later date. Maybe he comes over, maybe he exposes himself. I push up to this little rock, provides some cover against the machine if he does come around that corner. But instead I'm now thinking about going after this 58 Heavy, and hopefully we can get a shell into him. And he appears to be just trying to get an escape, but escape no more because the Jaegeru shuts him down. And the machine now comes around that corner. I don't think he was expecting me to be reloaded, but we track him in the open there. But then again, the intricate reload coming in to kind of shoot us in the foot there, having such a long intricate reload. So 5,600 damage is no terrible feat, but it's nothing spectacular. It's still a good game. I'm sure most people would be happy with this. Obviously, I have limited time to actually play the tank, so I mean, for YouTube and to showcase what the tank is about, I feel like it's a fair reflection. Because not every game is going to be able to, pick up 8,000, 9,000 damage. But we did see one person that managed to pick up an insane result, and we'll see that, I believe, in the next one. But I'll have to double check at the end of the game, because there was another 57 Heavy driver who had an absolute field day with the friendly team. But the machine here now pushing towards me. I've only got 2 in the clip. I try and go for the side armor, but the heat rounds honestly tried to finish me off there, and we only managed to track him, which is a shame. But the machine only has 320 alpha on its shell, so we were more than safe to actually finish him off there, even if he did pen 1 more, as he has 4 in the clip, and he managed to pen 2, and then of course could have hit us with another one before we could fire. So 6,261 damage and 1,460 assistance. So a good game there with a little bit of blocked, and I feel like it was quite a holistic game that showcased all sorts of things about this tank. But there's one more that I talked about in just a second ago, and let's have a look at that now. And that result is strolling in to Airfield, and Airfield being one of the maps that is kind of quite well known within World of Tanks. Of course, we have two variants. We have Sunset Coast and Airfield Standard. Of course, I've just been sat here driving whilst obviously on my phone or something. Apologies to the chieftain, I believe, that we crashed into. I apologise. But of course now picking up the controller once again and actually not being a bot. So we move forward into a kind of forward position. You don't want to be camping with this tank. You don't want to be sniping with it. It's not particularly too good at doing that. So if we can get forward and get some early damage, then that's going to be very, very nice for this tank. So what we do is we push forward. We manage to find this 58 heavy who's pushed into the middle of the open field. Not a good idea, exposing all of that hull armor, as we talked about being pretty trash. But yeah, we've managed to get a little bit of damage on him. And so I push around this corner. Maybe we can get some early damage on this TD who's around here. It's an E4. Uh-oh, please don't hit me. He doesn't manage to, but of course the 58 heavy, who for some reason pushes round the middle of the corner. Have no idea what that guy was doing, but he manages to hit us in the side. So we lose a quarter or a third of our hit points there, which is gutting to say the least. But this is a common occurrence now with the 58 heavies being around, and with so many in the game. You've got to be very careful. You can get clipped out quite easily if there's a few that manage to hit you all at once. Yeah, you ain't surviving very long. So tier 8 standard vehicles must be really hating this at the moment. But of course that is just purely because there's a load of them. It's not because the tank is inherently overpowered or broken. I think it's just a very strong tank. And of course can be played quite well if you do like this sort of playstyle where you can kind of play a little bit more passive, but you also have to be kind of aggressive in those moments. It's like a passive aggressive tank, as much as there can be one in World of Tanks. Now we push around, we try and get a shell onto this 58 heavy. There's an Object 752 who's sat up in the area over there. That's an auto-loading Soviet tank. Of course a heavy as well. We try and go for the YOLO shot on the Object 752, which has a pretty decent turret, but it doesn't quite have enough to deal with the 370 pen that we have on this vehicle. So we place a nice little one blind there. Nice to see it actually pen. And now we're just kind of pushing over onto this left hand side. Now there is a 58 heavy for some reason once again in that position. Don't know why they keep pulling out in front of all of our tanks, but we'll let them do it. We'll kind of push forward, and hopefully we can deal with whatever this other T58 heavy is doing. He seems to be on the happy side too, trying to push forward. So not a problem there, but we place one into the side of this one and then just pulling back around that corner, letting our teammates help us whilst also stalling that reload so we can be reloaded. And then he fires, so that means we've got 7 seconds or 7.5 seconds till we can essentially come around and try and finish him off. And then we find the rear side of an E5, so easy damage there. And then the 58 heavy on their team is also sat down here. So hopefully, even though we're not reloaded, we'll be able to get some damage due to the ram. But of course he gets finished off right before. So a little bit unfortunate that we didn't manage to get the ram, but not a problem to be honest. But we do push over to this rock area. I'm hoping maybe we could spot for the team and maybe we could get a little bit of damage. Now I pull behind the rock. I want to make sure that we don't kind of throw this game or anything like that. We pick up a nice shell on the enemy 57 heavy, but now 58 heavy even. But of course now we're in a bit of a pickle. We've got to try and deal with this guy. I'm hoping I can just pre-aim him and be able to get a shell on him. And of course he looks like he's just constantly trying to poke me, so I've not got a problem with that. Hopefully we can get the shell on him. I go for that shell, but unfortunately he does manage to come around and he actually goes for kind of a YOLO shot. Manages to hit the engine deck by the looks of it and finishes us off in this game. But let's skip forward to the end result, because we got finished off by that 58 heavy, who, props to him, obviously managing to get me out of the game. Nice one by him, nice little shell there. And I don't have any problems with it. You know, it's a common occurrence to be hit whilst driving slowly. He wasn't doing anything stupid. Slowed down a little bit when he went to fire, so no problems there. But of course, let's jump ahead to the victory screen and we can see whether or not we actually managed to win. And yes, given the fact that it's a victory screen, kind of spoiler there, we pick up 5,707 damage, 1,340 assistance with once again 1,100 blocks. So it's nice to see this tank blocking quite a bit. But of course the enemy T58 Heavy that finishes off did 11,000 damage. That is absolutely crazy. That is a massive props to that guy. Of course, would have actually been more damage than I think I've ever done. I think I'm only up to about 10.9 thousand is my highest. But yeah, very, very well played there. And yeah, nice to see you actually doing well. So yeah, good to see that I died to the one that actually had a stumper of a game, 11,311. So big props to LSWV. Really, really good one. And of course we managed to win nonetheless, even with him basically carrying his team to try and win. But other than that, that is this vehicle. Hopefully that was a good indication as to whether you think this tank is worth it. But in my opinion, I think it is definitely worth it if you're interested in heavy tanks at this tier, if you're interested in autoloaders, and if you just genuinely want to get those free 25 levels. This is a massive bonus, and you'll probably never see it as cheap as it is. So now is the time to buy this tank if you're thinking about it. But, you know, at the end of the day, it is completely down to you whether you want to spend the money. It costs, what, like about £25 roughly to be able to pick it up. And you'll probably find that you make most of that back, the 6,000 gold, from just the season pass itself and the key cards that you get. So weigh it up in your own head, decide what you want to do. And of course, let me know in the comment section down below, what do you think of this tank? Is it overpowered? Is it good? Is it terrible? Or what do you think about it? I personally found it a little bit boring. It's not my kind of tank. It's a little bit too slow, and I just find it a little bit boring to play with that 7.5 second inch-click reload. But other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and I hope I see you in the next video. Don't forget to check out the gameplay and tank reviews playlist for more on the screen right now. Goodbye.